The fire marshal looked at the delivery truck sitting across our neighborhood's only emergency lane, then looked at the red-painted curb underneath its tires. Who told this driver he could park here? My neighbor, Brett Callahan, lifted one hand like the whole thing was beneath him. "I did," he said. "It's just for the party." The marshal stared at him for a second. Then he said, "Sir, a fire lane does not become a loading zone because you invited 200 people to a pool party." That was the moment Brett finally understood that the strip of pavement he had treated like his private driveway for 3 months was not just a red curb outside my house. It was the one route an engine could use to reach 12 homes at the back of our cul-de-sac. And by then, the fire department had already measured everything. I've lived on Juniper Ridge Court in North County, San Diego for 14 years. It's one of those quiet hillside neighborhoods where every house has stucco walls, drought-tolerant landscaping, and views people pay too much money for. There are only 12 homes on our little dead-end street. The neighborhood looks simple from the front, but it isn't. Behind our houses sits a narrow brush-covered canyon. It's beautiful most of the year. In late summer, when the Santa Ana winds start moving through the hills, it is also the reason every homeowner on our street knows exactly where the emergency access lane is. The lane runs along the east side of the subdivision. It's 20 feet wide, paved in asphalt, marked with red curbs, and connected to a locked emergency gate at the far end. Normal cars are never supposed to use it. The gate opens only for fire trucks, paramedics, utility crews, and county emergency personnel. That lane was part of the original fire plan. When the neighborhood was built in 1998, it was written into the subdivision map, the HOA's governing documents, and every homeowner's disclosure packet. Nobody liked paying to maintain it. Nobody needed it on an ordinary Tuesday. But everyone understood why it existed. At least, I thought everyone did. My wife, Claire, and I bought our house in 2012. We raised our daughter here. We watched neighbors come and go. Watched kids learn to ride bikes in the cul-de-sac. Watched the canyon turn gold every October and green every spring. I'm a civil engineer. Not the exciting kind. I don't build bridges on television. I spent most of my career reviewing grading plans, drainage reports, and access requirements for commercial projects. So maybe I notice things other people overlook. A faded curb stripe, a blocked hydrant, a gate that opens the wrong way. Claire says I have the personality of a building inspector trapped inside a dad body. She's probably right. For the first 12 years, the emergency lane was boring. Exactly how you want an emergency lane to be. The HOA hired a landscaping company twice a year to clear weeds along the edge. A locksmith inspected the gate. The red curbs stayed red. Life went on. Then Brett Callahan moved into the house directly across from ours. Brett was 46, ran some kind of luxury event company, and had the kind of confidence that made every conversation feel like he was already late for something more important. He and his wife, Melissa, bought the largest house on the street after an elderly couple moved into assisted living. The property had a 3-car garage, a wide circular driveway, and a backyard pool that overlooked the canyon. It also happened to sit beside the emergency lane. For the first few weeks, Brett was pleasant enough. He brought over wine. He told us he wanted to bring some energy back to the neighborhood. He talked about charity dinners, corporate retreats, and private events. We assumed he meant a few cookouts and birthday parties. Then the deliveries started. First came a landscaping trailer, then a crew installing brighter exterior lights, then 2 trucks carrying patio furniture. None of that bothered me. What bothered me was where Brett told them to park. The first time I saw a truck in the fire lane, it was a Tuesday morning in May. A white box truck was backed halfway through the emergency gate, unloading stone pavers for Brett's backyard renovation. I walked over, thinking maybe the driver had made an honest mistake. "Hey," I said, "you may want to move that truck. This is emergency access." The driver looked relieved. Someone had said something. I told him that, he said, nodding toward Brett's house. Homeowner said it was fine. Brett came around the side yard holding a coffee. It's temporary. Anna, he said. For the record, my name is Anna Morales. My husband's name is Daniel. Brett called me Anna from the beginning, usually with that smile people use when they want you to feel unreasonable before you've even finished a sentence. It may be temporary, I said, but it's still not allowed. He glanced at the truck, then at me. It'll be gone by lunch. I could have called the HOA then. I could have called county code enforcement, but I didn't. There was no emergency. The truck was unloading. I figured he was new, and most people need a little time to learn how a neighborhood works. By lunch, the truck was gone. 2 days later, another truck showed up. This one stayed until nearly 4 in the afternoon. Then Brett started having weekend events. Not huge at first. A birthday dinner with caterers, a small business mixer, a summer launch party, whatever that meant. Cars lined both sides of the street. People carried garment bags and flower arrangements through his front gate. A valet service began using the emergency lane as a turnaround area. The lane was clearly marked "No Parking Fire Lane" in 6 separate places. But Brett treated those signs like decorations. The HOA board did not help. The HOA president at the time was a retired dentist named Paul Donnelly. Nietzscheman. Conflict avoidant. The kind of person who believed every problem could be solved with a friendly email and the phrase, "Let's all be good neighbors." Paul sent Brett 2 reminders. Brett ignored both. Then, in June, Brett had a wedding reception in his backyard. I know it was a wedding reception because a florist truck blocked the emergency lane at 10:30 inches the morning, and by noon, a white arch covered in roses had been assembled beside his pool. Claire and I watched from our kitchen window as a line of vendors used the access lane to unload chairs, champagne cut, lighting equipment, and a portable bar. At one point, there were 3 vehicles parked in a space meant to be kept completely clear. Claire turned to me and said, "This is getting ridiculous." I nodded. "I know. Are you going to do something? I'm going to give him one clear warning first." That afternoon, I printed the relevant section from our HOA rules, the County Fire Access Standard, and the recorded subdivision map showing the lane as Emergency Fire Access Easement. I walked across the street with the papers in a folder. Brett was standing beside a rental SUV, talking into his phone. He saw me coming and gave me an exaggerated little sigh before he even ended the call. "Anna," he said, "what can I do for you?" I handed him the folder. "This needs to stop," I said. "Not eventually. Now. The lane has to stay clear." He flipped through the first 2 pages without really reading them. "Are you seriously doing paperwork over a few vendors?" "I'm doing paperwork because that route is the only vehicle access to the homes behind us if there's a brush fire." He laughed once. Not loudly. Just enough to make sure I knew he found me amusing. "Anna, nobody is having a brush fire. That isn't how emergency planning works." "No," he said, handing the folder back. "That's how fear works." I took the folder and kept my voice even. "It's not fear. It's a recorded access easement. You cannot park in it, stage vendors in it, or use it as overflow for events." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know what I think? I think you don't like that my house is finally being used for something other than watching birds and watering succulents." I could have snapped back. Instead, I said, "I don't care what you do in your house. I care that a fire truck may not be able to get through if somebody's home is burning." Brett smiled again. "Well, then you should be happy. I hired private security for the event." That was the first time I realized he truly did not understand the difference between inconvenience and danger. Or maybe he understood perfectly and just assumed danger only happened to other people. The wedding reception ended around midnight. The next morning, I found tire marks across the red curb, crushed landscaping near the gate, and a broken reflective marker that had been installed, so emergency crews could see the lane at night. I took photos, not because I wanted revenge, because I had a feeling I was going to need proof. Over the next month, I documented everything. Every truck, every valet stand, every catering van, every time a guest parked in the lane, while Brett's event staff waved them in like it was a reserved service road. I built a simple folder on my computer: date, time, vehicle, plate if visible, photo, duration. On July 3rd, a moving truck blocked the lane for 6 hours. On July 12th, an ice delivery truck stayed there for 1 hour and 47 minutes. On July 19th, Brett placed temporary black stanchions across the lane during a cocktail party so guests would not walk through the service entrance. On July 26th, he had someone install 2 decorative planters beside the gate. They narrowed the usable width from 20 feet to barely 16. That last one got my attention. Fire access roads are not just about whether a car can squeeze through. Fire apparatus needs room, turning clearance, space for hose, space for crews moving under pressure in smoke and heat. I measured the gap with a tape measure. 16 feet, 2 inches. Then I checked the county's fire access standard. 20 feet unobstructed. I sent the information to the HOA board. Paul replied with a polite message saying the board would review the matter. Brett replied to everyone on the email chain. Anna has developed an unhealthy fixation on my property. The lane has always been used for service access, and I will not be bullied over harmless neighborhood events. That was when Claire stopped trying to stay neutral. He's calling you a bully because you asked him not to block a fire lane? Apparently. She looked through the window at Brett's house, where another delivery crew was carrying rental furniture through the side yard. Then stopped treating him like he's going to be reasonable. I wanted to believe the HOA would handle it. After all, the lane belonged to the association. The HOA was responsible for keeping it accessible. Their insurance policy required it. Their own rules required it. But Paul kept delaying. Then the board election happened. Brett didn't run for president. That would have been too obvious. Instead, Melissa ran for the board, and Brett's friend Chad Riley ran with her. Chad owned a real estate brokerage and had been helping Brett advertise his event property online. They won. Within 2 weeks, the board changed the guest parking guidance for special events. They did not officially authorize parking in the emergency lane. They knew better than that. But they created a vague rule allowing temporary service access use if an event host notified the HOA. Brett treated that sentence like a permit to do whatever he wanted. The event schedule got bigger. A bridal shower with 40 cars. A private tasting event with a rented shuttle bus. A fundraiser where a food truck parked directly in front of the emergency gate because Brett wanted the truck visible from the street. Then came the August heat. Anyone who lives in Southern California knows the feeling. The sky turns pale. The hills dry out. The wind begins sounding different at night. Not louder exactly. Sharper. The county issued a red flag warning for the following weekend. And Brett announced his biggest event yet, a Sunset Canyon Lights charity gala. 180 guests. Live music. Caterers. Valet parking. Portable generators. I saw the invitation online because one of Melissa's friends posted it publicly. The event was scheduled for Saturday evening. The same night, the forecast called for wind gusts up to 45 miles per hour. Claire read it over my shoulder. Tell me he isn't planning to use the fire lane. I looked at the map attached to the invitation. The valet drop-off was marked right beside the emergency gate. And just like that, I knew a friendly email was no longer enough. The Thursday before Brett's gala, I sent one final message. I copied Brett. Melissa. Every HOA board member, our property manager, and the County Fire Prevention Office's general information address. I kept it short. I am formally requesting that the emergency fire access lane on Juniper Ridge Court remain fully unobstructed during the event scheduled for Saturday. August 17. The lane is designated on the recorded subdivision map as an emergency access easement and requires a minimum 20-foot clear width. Recent parking, vendor staging, decorative planters, and event barriers have reduced or blocked that access. Please confirm in writing that all obstructions will be removed before the event begins. I attached 3 photos, the subdivision map, and the relevant county standard. Brett answered 20 minutes later. Anna, your obsession is becoming disruptive. We have notified the HOA. Our event staff will manage traffic safely. Please stop attempting to interfere with a permitted private gathering. That phrase caught my eye. Permitted private gathering. I checked the county's temporary event permit portal. There was no permit listed for Brett's address. That did not automatically mean he needed one. Private events sometimes do not, but if he planned to use the street, emergency lane, generators, volet operation, or commercial catering setup at that scale, he might have needed approvals he did not have. I did not accuse him of anything. I simply emailed the county fire prevention office again. This time, I asked a question. Could you clarify whether an HOA may approve temporary use of a recorded emergency fire access lane for event parking, vendor staging, or volet operations? The next morning, I got a reply from a fire prevention specialist named Marisol Vega. It was only 4 sentences long, but it changed everything. An OA does not have authority to waive fire access requirements. Designated fire apparatus access roads must remain unobstructed at all times, unless specifically approved in writing by the fire code official. Based on the materials you provided, please submit a formal concern report with photos and the event date, time. I read it twice. Then I submitted the report. I did not call Brett. I did not post about him online. I did not stand in his driveway waving papers around. I gave the people responsible for fire access the facts, and I let them decide what those facts meant. By Friday afternoon, Brett had somehow heard that I contacted the fire department. He knocked on my door at 6:15. I remember the time because Claire and I were just sitting down to dinner. The doorbell rang, and through the glass I could see Brett standing there in a navy polo. Sunglasses still on, even though the sun was nearly down. Claire whispered, "Don't do this alone." So she stood beside me when I opened the door. Brett didn't say hello. "Did you report my event?" "I reported an emergency access concern." "You tried to get my event shut down?" "I asked the fire prevention office whether the lane could legally be used the way you've been using it." He leaned forward just slightly. "You have no idea how much this event is costing me. That doesn't make the lane yours." "You know what?" he said. "I'm done explaining myself to you. The HOA approved the event. The homeowners I've spoken to are tired of you turning every little thing into an emergency." Claire took 1 step forward. "There are only 12 homes here," she said. "Which homeowners are you talking about?" Brett ignored her. Then he looked directly at me and said the sentence I will never forget. "If a fire truck needs to get through, they can move whatever is in the way." It was such a careless thing to say that for a second I didn't have an answer. Then I said, "A fire truck should not have to waste time moving your party out of the way." His jaw tightened. "You're going to regret making this personal bio." I remember feeling very calm at that moment. Maybe too calm. Because I said, "Brett, I haven't made this personal. You parked commercial vehicles in an emergency lane. You narrowed the access route. You put guests and neighbors at risk. Those are choices you made." He stared at me for another second, then turned and walked away. Claire closed the door behind him. "Saturday is going to be a mess," she said. She was right. Saturday came in hot and dry. By noon, the wind was already pushing dust through the canyon and bending the palms along the main road. The county had elevated the fire weather warning. A small brush fire had started 20 miles east of us that morning. Though it was contained quickly, Brett's event crew arrived at 1. First came the flower truck, then a box truck carrying tables, then a catering fan, then a company setting up string lights and a small stage in Brett's backyard. Après 13. A valet crew placed orange cones along both sides of the emergency lane. At Patru 0. They rolled in 2 portable generators on trailers. At Patru 2. Brett's landscaping crew moved the decorative planters closer together, creating an even narrower opening near the gate. At Patru 45. A black SUV parked across the lane with its trunk open, while 2 employees unloaded wine cases I stood on my porch and took photos. Not secretly, not dramatically, just clearly. At 5:10, the first guests started arriving. Women in summer dresses, men in linen jackets, people holding gift bags and bottles of wine. They were directed down our street by a valet employee with a flashlight wand. Several guests looked confused when they saw the red-painted curb. One asked where to park. The valet worker pointed to the emergency lane, right there. "Ma'am, we'll take care of it." Within 20 minutes, the lane was packed. Not just partially used, packed. A catering van sat beside the gate. 2 SUVs were lined up behind it. A generator trailer occupied the center. Decorative barriers narrowed the entrance. A golf cart was parked at an angle near Brett's side yard. From our front porch, the road looked less like emergency access and more like the service entrance to a hotel. Then, at 5:47 p.m., a white county fire prevention SUV turned onto Juniper Ridge Court. It rolled slowly past our house. It stopped behind the first valet vehicle. The music from Brett's backyard was already playing. You could hear people laughing beyond the stucco wall. The smell of grilled food drifted across the street. A woman in a dark county uniform stepped out of the SUV. Marisol Vega. She had a clipboard in one hand and a measuring wheel in the other. I watched from my porch as she approached the valet attendant. "Who was in charge of this event?" she asked. The young man pointed toward Brett's gate. Marisol looked down at the red curb. Then she looked at the vehicles. Then she started taking photos. Brett came out less than a minute later, smiling the smile he used whenever he wanted someone to think he was in control. "Can I help you?" Marisol held up her county identification. "I'm with fire prevention. Are you the property owner?" "Yes." "Did you authorize vehicles and equipment to occupy this fire access lane?" Brett looked toward the guests, then toward the valet crew. "It's temporary. We're hosting a private charity function." "I understand. Did you obtain written approval from the fire code official to obstruct the lane?" He paused. "The HOA approved our traffic plan." Marisol's expression didn't change. "The HOA cannot approve an obstruction of required fire apparatus access." Brett folded his arms. "This is a neighborhood street. There's plenty of room." She measured from one edge of the obstruction to the other. Then she called out the result. 11 feet, 8 inches. Brett said, "A vehicle can fit through that." She looked at him. "A passenger car can. A fire engine cannot." That was when the mood changed. People near the entry stopped talking. A few guests turned around. Someone's phone appeared in the air. Filming. Brett tried to move closer to Marisol, speaking more quietly. "Look, we have vendors here. Guests. Contracts. This event has been planned for months." Marisol said. "Then it should have been planned without blocking the emergency lane." She handed him a notice of violation. It required immediate clearing of the lane. Not after dinner. Not after the speeches. Immediately. Brett read it, his face tightening. "You're shutting down my event? I'm requiring you to restore emergency access. If you refuse, I can request law enforcement assistance and issue additional citations." He looked across the street at me. I could feel it. That moment when someone decides the person following the rules is the reason they are facing consequences. Brett walked toward my house. Claire came outside and stood beside me. He stopped at the edge of our yard. "You did this?" he said. "I reported what you were doing." "You wanted this?" "No." I said, "I wanted you to stop blocking the fire lane before it got to this point." His voice rose. "You could have talked to me." Claire let out one short, disbelieving laugh. She did. Repeatedly. Brett turned back toward the fire prevention officer. His crew had started moving cones. But the vehicles were still there. Guests were still arriving. The catering company was arguing with a valet manager about where to put the vans. Then a gust of wind came down from the canyon. It hit hard enough to send napkins and flower petals across the pavement. For just a few seconds, everybody got quiet. The dry brush beyond the homes moved in one long wave. Marisol looked toward the canyon, then back at the blocked lane. "Clear it now," she said. Brett did not clear it now. He cleared part of it. One SUV moved. Then another. But he told the catering van to remain because food was being unloaded. He insisted the generator trailer could stay for 10 more minutes. He moved the golf cart but left the decorative barriers in place. Marisol measured again. 13 feet. 1 inch. Still not enough. She issued a second citation. The total fine was not huge by Brett's standards. It was $1, $250 for the violation, with additional penalties if not corrected. But that was not the real problem. The real problem was that the notice was now attached to the property record and forwarded to the HOA management company. And because Brett had been using the house for recurring commercial-style events, the county also referred the matter to zoning compliance and the Sheriff's Office Special Events Unit. Brett's gala continued, but it did not feel like a gala anymore. The valet team had to redirect guests to street parking. Several people left early. The live band started late because their equipment truck had to be moved. The caterer was angry because they had been forced to carry supplies from half a block away. By 9 o'clock, the music had gone quiet. Bitten. The event was over. The next morning, the neighborhood message board lit up. Brett posted first. Last night, an HOA resident weaponized county resources against a charity fundraiser, causing unnecessary disruption and embarrassment to invited guests. We will be reviewing options to protect homeowners from harassment. He never used my name. He didn't need to. Within an hour, 2 board members commented with vague support about maintaining a respectful community. Then something unexpected happened. 3 neighbors replied with photos. One was from the wedding reception in June, showing the fire lane blocked by vendor trucks. Another was from the July fundraiser, showing the gate narrowed by planters. A third came from Mr. and Mrs. Lee at the end of the cul-de-sac. Mr. Lee used a wheelchair after a stroke. He wrote only one sentence. If there had been a fire at my home, that lane was our only way out. Brett deleted his post before noon, but the county did not delete its report. On Monday, Marisol returned with a larger inspection team. This time they checked more than the emergency lane. They checked the gate, the clearance markers, the condition of the road surface, the location of the planters, the event lighting, and the generator storage area. They found that the emergency gate's key box had been damaged. They found that the reflective address markers had been covered by decorative landscaping. They found that the lane had been used so often by delivery vehicles that the asphalt near the gate had cracked and sunk in one section. And then they found something I did not know about. A temporary storage shed behind Brett's side fence. It sat partly within the recorded emergency access easement. Brett had used it to store folding chairs, bar table, and event equipment. The shed was only 8 feet wide, but it reduced the clear turning space for emergency vehicles near the end of the lane. The inspector took one look at the survey map and said, "This can't be here." Brett tried to explain that the shed was temporary. The inspector replied, "Temporary structures can still block permanent emergency access." That afternoon, the HOA finally held an emergency meeting. Brett came in looking tired, angry, and determined to blame everyone but himself. He argued that the county was overreacting. He argued that residents were trying to punish him for hosting events. He argued that the lane had never been used by a fire truck, so the risk was theoretical. Then Mr. Lee's wife stood up. She is a quiet woman. Her name is Nora. She rarely speaks at meetings. But that night, she looked directly at Brett and said, "The risk is theoretical until it is your husband waiting for an ambulance that cannot get through." Nobody said a word after that. The HOA board voted to suspend all special event access privileges. They also voted to remove the planters and barriers immediately. Brett and Melissa voted against the motion. Then came the part Brett never saw coming. The HOA's insurance carrier had been notified of the fire access violation, and their response was not polite. The insurance letter arrived 10 days later. It said the association had failed to maintain required emergency access and had permitted repeated unauthorized obstructions. It required the HOA to correct every violation, document compliance, and provide proof of inspection within 30 days. If they did not, the carrier could refuse coverage for claims connected to emergency access failures. For a small HOA with 12 homes, that was terrifying. Our annual insurance premium was already high because of wildfire risk. Without coverage, nobody could sell easily. Lenders could refuse new mortgages. Existing homeowners could face special assessments just to obtain replacement coverage. In other words, Brett's parties had stopped being Brett's problem. They had become everyone's problem. At the next meeting, the property manager read the county's compliance list out loud. Remove all planters, storage structures, and decorative barriers from the easement. Repair the damaged asphalt. Restore the full 20-foot width. Replace the reflective markers. Repair the emergency key box. Post permanent no parking signs at both entrances. Submit a fire access maintenance plan. Provide a written explanation of how the HOA had allowed recurring obstructions. The repair estimate came to $18. $640. That number included asphalt work, gate service, signage, landscaping removal, a survey verification, and an after-hours fire department inspection. Nobody was thrilled about it. But then our HOA attorney explained the part that mattered. The association could pay the bill first to restore safety. After that, it could seek reimbursement from the homeowner whose repeated unauthorized uses had caused the damage and violations. Brett sat forward in his chair. You can't put that on me. The attorney adjusted his glasses. The board would need to review the evidence. But if the documented damage and compliance costs resulted from your unauthorized commercial activity and obstruction of the access easement, the governing documents allow the association to assess those costs to your lot. Brett looked at Melissa. Melissa looked down at the table. For the first time since he moved in, Brett did not seem angry. He seemed worried, and I almost felt sorry for him. Almost, because before the board could even vote on reimbursement, the zoning office sent Brett another notice. They had reviewed the advertisements for his Canyon Lights events. They found online listings offering the property for private receptions, photo shoots, corporate gatherings, and intimate luxury celebrations. The listings used terms like venue, event capacity, private chef access, and valet-friendly arrival. Brett had been renting out his home as an event space, not occasionally lending it to friends, not hosting a few personal parties, running a business from a residential property. The zoning notice gave him 14 days to stop commercial event operations or apply for a conditional use review. The notice also required him to disclose the number of past events and submit parking and fire safety plans for any future application. Brett tried to claim the listings were handled by a marketing partner and were exploratory. The county was not interested in word games. They had screenshots. They had dates. They had guest photos publicly posted from events. And, thanks to Brett's own social media, they had videos of valet attendants directing cars into the fire lane. The special events unit issued an administrative fine of $4,500 for operating commercial events without the required approvals. Then the county fire prevention office added a $2,000 reinspection and enforcement fee because Brett had failed to fully clear the storage shed by the original deadline. That was $6,500 before the HOA assessed anything. Brett did what people like Brett often do when they finally meet a consequence they cannot charm away. He hired a lawyer. The lawyer sent the HOA a letter accusing the board of selective enforcement and retaliation. The letter said Brett had relied in good faith on the HOA's temporary service access guidance. That part was not entirely false. The HOA had been weak. Paul had delayed. The board's vague wording had created room for Brett to pretend there was permission, but it did not give him the right to block the fire lane, and it did not give him the right to turn a residential house into an unapproved event venue. Our HOA attorney answered with the timeline. Every warning email, every photo, every date, the county notices, The fire marshal's inspection results, Brett's own written statement saying, if a fire truck needs to get through, they can move whatever is in the way. That quote was included word for word. His lawyer dropped the retaliation claim 3 days later. The board met again in September. This time, the room was full. Not because people enjoy HOA meetings. Nobody does. But because every homeowner understood that the insurance issue could affect the value of every house on the street, the board had 3 choices. They could spread the $18,640 repair cost across all 12 homes. They could use reserve funds and delay other planned maintenance. Or they could assess the documented costs to Brett's property. The attorney explained that the board could not charge him more than the costs tied directly to the violations. It was not punishment. It was reimbursement. Brett stood up before the vote. He looked different than he had during that first summer. Less polished. Le certain? His expensive confidence had been replaced by the tired look of someone who had spent too much money arguing with people who had stopped listening. I made mistakes, he said, but this whole thing has gotten out of hand. Nora Lee spoke before anyone else could. No, she said, it got handled. That was all. The board voted 4-1 to assess Brett $18. Liu Bai Sisher. Melissa abstained. Brett voted no. For a while, I thought that would be the end of it. The lane was repaired. The planters were removed. The storage shed disappeared. New signs went up at both ends. Fire lane, no stopping. Standing or parking tow away. The HOA hired a company to repaint the curbs a bright, unmistakable red. And the fire department completed its final inspection. Marisol sent the association a brief confirmation. Access route restored to required clearance. Gate operational. No remaining obstructions observed. That should have been the end. But Brett still had one more problem. The event business had been generating a lot of income. I did not know exactly how much, but I learned later that he had signed contracts for 6 more private events through the fall. A wedding photo shoot. A brand launch. 2 corporate dinners. A birthday party. A holiday fundraiser. All of them had to be canceled or relocated. Some clients got their deposits back. Some did not. One client posted an angry review online saying Brett had advertised a fully approved private estate venue and then canceled less than 3 weeks before her event. The review spread. His event company's rating dropped. The local planner who had referred several clients to him stopped working with him. By October, the online event listings had disappeared. Brett never held another commercial gathering at the house. The most ironic part was that nobody had tried to stop him from enjoying his own home. He could still have friends over. He could still use his pool. He could still host a birthday dinner, a family barbecue, or a holiday party like anyone else. What he could not do was convert the street around his house into his private loading dock and expect everyone else to accept the risk. One evening in November, about 3 months after the fire marshal's first visit, I was walking our dog near the emergency gate when Brett pulled up in his SUV. He parked legally this time, in his own driveway. He got out, saw me, and hesitated. For a second, I thought he might turn around and go inside. Instead, he crossed the street. I wanted to say something, he said. I waited. He looked toward the lane. The curbs were newly painted. The gate had been repaired. The red signs were impossible to miss. I was wrong about that, he said. It was not a dramatic apology. No speech. No excuses. Just a sentence. I said, I appreciate you saying it. He nodded. I kept thinking everybody was trying to control me. Nobody wanted to control you, Brett. We wanted the lane open. He gave a small, humorless laugh. Yeah, I see that now. Then he looked back at his house. The parties were a bad idea. I could have said a lot. I could have reminded him of every email, every insult, every time he called me obsessive or disruptive. But I didn't, because the point was never to humiliate him. The point was that people got to come home to a neighborhood where an ambulance, a fire engine, or an evacuation vehicle could reach them if they needed it. So I said, You can fix a lot of things once you stop pretending nothing is wrong. He nodded again, went back to his house. And that was the last real conversation we had. A few months later, Brett and Melissa put their home on the market. The listing did not mention canyon lights. It mentioned canyon views, a remodeled pool, and a quiet cul-de-sac. That part, at least, was finally true again. The emergency lane is still there. It is still boring. It is still empty. And every time I walk past it, I think about how close we came to treating a safety rule like a neighborhood argument. Some people hear the word fire lane and picture a red curb that ruins their parking plan. But that lane was never about paint, signs, or HOA rules. It was about time. The extra minute a fire engine cannot reach a house, the extra minute an ambulance cannot get through, the extra minute a family waits while someone says, "Just move the truck." Brett spent months acting like that minute belonged to him. It didn't. It belonged to every person living behind that gate. And when he finally learned that, it cost him far more than a party ever should have. If you enjoy stories where people protect their homes, their families, and the rights others try to brush aside, subscribe to Anna's Neighborhood Justice. Around here, the loudest person in the room is not always the one who is right. And tell me in the comments, if your neighbor repeatedly blocked the only emergency lane serving your street, would you have called the fire marshal after the first warning, or waited until it became impossible to ignore? Where is the line between being patient and letting someone else gamble with your safety?